Well, good morning. Thank you for being here, especially on this Eid weekend. Whether you're here in purpose or joining us through the live feed or having to sit in our platinum seating, which sounds like it'd be a good place to go, isn't it? Platinum seating. Anyway, how are you? I'm Pastor Jim, and today I have a confession for you. Not something necessarily I'm proud of, but I think it's something that you should know, especially considering this new teaching series we start today. And my confession is, I am a doubter. It's true. Throughout my life, I've had a lot of doubts about things. I'm just not a person who takes to belief easily. I've always struggled to believe things that seemed impossible or seemed too good to be true. Are you like that? Do you have someone in your family like that? It sounds strange coming from a pastor. You would think somebody who has spent his life trying to help people believe metaphysical things, it would be somebody who believes those things easily. But maybe that's the whole reason why I felt drawn to God calling me into this, is because I wanted to be able to study things deeply and to understand them for myself and decide whether or not I should share those with others. I don't really remember exactly when I became prone to doubt. I don't remember being a particularly skeptical child, although I do remember that the whole Santa story seemed pretty thin when I was 5 years old. I do remember that. And don't even, try the Easter Bunny or the Good Tooth Fairy on me. Don't even try that one. As I got older, became a young teenager, I started asking a lot of questions. I remember asking a lot of questions in a Christian home. I remember going to church every Sunday, going to Sunday school, if you know what that is from your home country. And I remember, asking a lot of questions that the teacher couldn't answer and kind of frustrating the teacher and, being called a troublemaker, in Sunday school. I remember that. But I had a lot of questions about my beliefs and my beliefs in God, and being a Christian. And having been raised by Christian parents and being raised in what was then a pretty Christian country. Did I only believe these things because that's where I ended up? What if I'd been born someplace else? What would I have believed? I remember going off to university and deciding that I was going to be a double major, even though it meant more work, in religion and philosophy, because I really wanted to sincerely look for truth. So that meant I spent the next 4 years with a Bible in one hand and a philosophy book in the other, which made for some interesting classes and also some wonderful long night, sessions. You ever have those when you're in university where you talk way into the night and everything makes so much sense, at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why that is, but you got everything figured out after about, 3 boxes of pizza and, a couple liters of Coke. I didn't know why that makes sense. At any rate, I also started smoking a pipe. It was a tobacco pipe. Just to clarify. And just want to make sure I still have a job after this series is over. But I only smoked for about a week. I felt so smart. There was something about being able to tap out a pipe and, look at people and go, yes, I understand. Yeah. I don't know what that is. Anyway, my girlfriend then, Alanda, who's now my wife, she didn't like the pipe. So I decided to keep Alanda and get rid of the pipe. So I thought that was a pretty good decision. At any rate, obviously after that, then I spent all those years in university and studying that, looking for answers, but it wasn't enough. So then I decided to go get a 4-year theological degree, studying Greek and Hebrew, as I just kept asking and asking and asking. And I was really looking for answers for my doubts. And that really began this lifelong interest in this subject. I have read and thought and discussed and listened and searched the internet about doubt more than you can possibly imagine. And so I've always wanted to know, where do doubts come from? What is doubt? Why are some people more prone to doubt than others? And then, what happens when you begin to doubt your doubts? I know, you've never been there, but I have. Reminds me of a famous story of the French philosopher René Descartes. He was the guy who basically tried to prove existence through self-awareness. So his great quote was, "I think, therefore I am." You remember him? And it was a story's told that one day Descartes went to a tavern to meet some friends. And he was sitting at a table, and the tavern owner came over and he said, "Rene, would you like a beer?" To which Rene replied, "I think not." And poof, he disappeared. I had the same reaction when I was a first-year student. I heard that joke. It wasn't funny at all. But it was amazing. After 4 years of philosophy, I thought that was the funniest story I'd heard. So go read a philosophy book. Maybe you'll laugh. At any rate, where was I? Oh, yes. So I continued to study, and I was really wanted to grasp the truth of whether or not God existed. And if he did exist, could we know him? And if we could know him, what was he saying? And is he saying the same thing to everybody around the world? Or is he saying something specific and unique through the Bible and through Christ? And so I'll be honest, for a period of time, especially in university, I struggled to believe deeply in these things. I never lost my faith, but I did drag it behind me for a while. And I eventually came to some conclusions that helped formulate who I became and what I decided to do with my life. And what I want to do over the next few weeks is to share those things with you, to talk with you about the culmination of my studies, to share with you some of the very best thinking of the great men of history in this area of doubt, to look at what some of the contemporary thinkers are saying. But I'll be honest with you, the main place we're going to look for answers is to God. Surprise, surprise. Because out of all my studies and all the time I spent, and again, I cannot encapsulize in just a few words the length of time and the depth of time I spent on this. But in all that time and all the things I said, what I eventually found was that the one who knows more about doubt and has the best explanation of doubt, at least for me, was God in the Bible. And that's where we want to look. So perhaps we would be good to start our talk today by talking to him. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? Heavenly Father, we come to you today, some of us not really sure that you're even there. And I want to pray for each person, wherever they are, Lord, in their spiritual journey, or Father, maybe they're not even on a journey. Maybe they are just here to please someone else, or they came out of curiosity, or maybe they just wanted some free food. I don't know. Whatever the reason, Lord, I pray that you would reveal yourself intimately and personally to every person who's here in whatever way they need that. The Lord, you would make yourself real to them, as real as you eventually made yourself to me. And I pray, Father, that you would guide our conversation as we think today. Lord, help us to follow your mind. Help us to be willing to think about thoughts maybe we've never thought of before. Help us, Lord, over these next few weeks to be good students. Father, thank you for being our teacher, for none other can. Guide us now. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I tell you, I love the fact that our title slide here for our series gives a pretty good idea that we're going to be looking towards God. I mean, instead of looking at a search engine for truth, we're not going to Google it. We're going to goggle it. Is that a word? Goggle it? I don't think so. Anyway, we're going to look to God and see what he has to say. And today specifically, what we're going to look at is honest doubt. Honest doubt. What is honest doubt? Honest doubt is someone who truly wants to know the answer to their doubts. They're not playing games. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're not doubting because of something bad that happened to them in the past. They're not doubting because some university professor was a really good debater and was able to squash their tiny faith that they had when they came into that class. Honest doubt is someone who has thought about these things sincerely and impersonally and is really looking for answers. That's how I would define honest doubt. Now, what do we know about doubt in general? Well, a couple of things. First of all, we know that it's common. It's very, very common, probably more common than people would realize or care to admit. And of course, it's especially common in religion. And interestingly enough, it doesn't matter what religion it is. I have found doubt in every conceivable person, religious person I've ever talked to. And over the last 40 years and being able to travel some, I've not traveled as much as many of you. Some of you have run circles around me in your travels. But I've been to probably, I think I counted up 42 countries. And in the process, I've talked to Buddhists, Confucianists, Hindus, Muslims. I've talked to Baptists. I've talked to all the different varieties. I've talked to atheists and agnostics. I've talked to Satanists. And believe it or not, it doesn't matter what you believe about this life and the purpose of this life and what happens at the end of this life, everybody wonders if they're getting it right. That's a really fascinating thing that it's so common. Another thing about doubt is it's very international. It doesn't matter what culture you come to. All these different countries, some cultures have a tendency to be more restrictive in their doubt by culture, and they don't admit it. They don't discuss it. But if you get them alone and at ease and they trust you and you ask them about it, they'll tell you that they have some of these very same thoughts. It seems to be something that's a part of our makeup as human beings. And again, not everyone, but many people experience those doubts. Especially as it relates to Christians, we have a tendency to kind of try to brush the subject aside. I don't know about you, but I rarely have found a church where they were willing to be open and talk about this. And say, do you have doubts that God exists? Oh, no, heavens, no. We all believe in God here, don't we? Yes, oh yes, we all believe in God. In reality, you're thinking, man, I don't know, there's some things that I've heard that, really shaken my belief in that. I mean, what about this book? And what about this, movie that came out? And what about this class I had? And what about this experience that I had? And what about this tragedy in my family? Oh, man, there can be a list of things that can cause us to be shaken to the core in our faith. And I think it's so important that we're willing to open up and talk about this. So that's why this series is going to maybe be a little different than one you've seen in the past. And we're going to be looking for some, I think, real genuine answers and evidence about the existence of God. But at the same time, we're going to be talking about some things where there's not necessarily, we don't have all the answers. And I think that's one of the most important things that you have to come to a realization, no matter where you're from, is that nobody can give you an answer for every single thing. Only God can do that. That's why he's God and we're not. But he's left us, if you would, a trail that we can follow. And it's that trail that we want to be on. There's a professor in the U.S., interestingly, talking about Christians and doubt. And he teaches philosophy at a large university, Christian university in the U.S. And for years, the last 20 years, he has always asked his large first-year philosophy classes a question, and that is, have any of you ever experienced any doubt about your beliefs in God, answer to prayer, anything related to God and belief, your belief system at all? Have you ever doubted? And he reports that every year, the results are always the same. It's always somewhere between 70 and 90% of these students who doubt. And then he always asks another question: how many of you have ever admitted that to someone or ever talked to somebody about your doubts? Usually it's less than 10% who've ever done that. 90% doubting, 10% talking about it. We want to bring that to an end here over this series. So do you know people, friends, family members who struggle with doubts? Get them to watch the live feed. Get them to come be here if they're in Dubai. Love to have them, love to entertain their questions, love to talk with them about this kind of subject. Something else about doubt is the fact that there's been a lot of very famous people who have doubted. Surprisingly enough, some of those people are in the Bible. Did you know that? It's true. In the Old Testament, how about the very first, perhaps oldest book of the Bible, Job? Man, there's a guy who, you ever read the book of Job? This guy had a whole pantheon of doubts, which of course is somewhat understandable when you read his story and, found out what happened to him. He had a pretty hard time. How about this? How about Abraham and Sarah? I mean, this is Abraham of all people. I mean, the godfather of this whole faith thing. And yet he had serious doubts. And Sarah, oh man, God came and talked to her, and what did she do? She laughed in his face. Oh, sorry, did you hear me? Is that kind of, yeah, she did. This is incredible. How about this? Moses. I mean, even a burning bush could not convince Moses. He tried to back out of the deal. No, Lord, you got the wrong guy. No, I'm shepherding over here. I think it's a guy over that way you need. It was that kind of deal. And this guy, Gideon, how many times did God have to do a miracle in his eyes? Literally, wake up in the morning and see a miracle before he finally decided he was the guy who was going to, do the battle. And then, of course, this fellow David. You ever read the Psalms, anybody? Oh, my goodness. You read some of those and you're going, what is that doing in the Bible? You know, was God out to lunch when he wrote that and he didn't see that? Read Psalm 88, for example. Oh, my goodness, it's incredible. Lots of doubt in the Bible. And you would think that would be a place that would be full of people who, had it all figured out and they had all the answers and nobody ever doubted. No, it's not like that. Human beings doubt. Maybe not every person. I've done some questioning and studies and surveys myself, and I have found people who said they have never, ever once doubted. Of course, there's a famous author who says that if you say you have no doubts about the existence of God, you're either lying or asleep. So I don't know if that's true or not. But I mean, I have met some people who had said, no, I've never doubted. I believed when I was a child, and it's always been that way always since. But I do believe they're in the minority. And I would guess if we were to ask right now for you to raise your hands, if you have ever questioned or wondered about your faith or about something related to God in the Bible, I bet there would be many, many. I'm not going to have to do that, but there could be many, many hands up. I guarantee you, perhaps the vast majority. How about the New Testament? Oh, yeah. Ever heard of this guy, John the Baptist? Yeah, I mean, what was it Jesus said of him? Of all the men born of women, there is none greater than John the Baptist. Yeah, what happened? As you're going to see next week, we're going to look at his story. John the Baptist went through a huge time of doubt and discouragement. And we'll talk about that. And then one of my favorite characters of all, Peter. We love Peter, don't we? Yeah. He's Mr. I can do anything for 10 seconds and then I'll sink. That was Peter. You got to love a guy like that. And that's what, that's kind of what doubt does, doesn't it? Doubt has a tendency to grab us and throw us around. And so we'll be going, boy, really feeling really good about what we believe. And then suddenly, gosh, it's like we get thrown over here. And you get tossed back and forth. And, and that's how James describes it in the book of James. It's like a ship being tossed on a stormy sea. And doubts can do that to you. Any of you ever feel that way? And, of course, the classic poster child of doubt in the Bible is this guy, Thomas the disciple. I mean, remember him after Jesus' resurrection? We'll be talking about him in a few weeks. I mean, his name is even associated with it, right? What do we call him? Doubting Thomas, How'd you like to have that for a handle when you got to heaven? Oh, hey, how are you? Who are you? I'm Thomas the disciple. Doubting Thomas! Hey, it's Doubting Thomas! I mean, that'd be doubting pastor. It'd be a bad thing. There's also a lot of people who are very famous that you would think are wonderful, mature, godly Christians who you would think have probably never doubted in their whole lives. And guess what? Some of them have. How about this guy? This C.S. Lewis, one of the great conversion stories of all time, was an agnostic, professor at Oxford, an English professor, eventually through a unique set of circumstances, became a believer in Christ and then became one of the greatest writers of all Christianity. Look what he once wrote. I am a Christian, but I do have moods in which the whole thing looks very improbable. Ever feel that way? Of course, I like the end of this quote. He goes on to say, also, though, when I was an atheist, I had moods where Christianity looked very probable. So again, he's back and forth. This is an interesting quote by Francis Schaeffer. Maybe you've never heard of him. But when I was a young university student, he was the greatest defender or apologist of Christianity. As a matter of fact, his amazing book, How Shall We Then Live, was something that kept me following Christ during a very difficult period of my life. He once wrote, this great apologist, for a time I faced a spiritual crisis. I told my wife, Edith, that for the sake of honesty, I had to go all the way back to my agnosticism and think through the whole matter. Amazing. Someone who later was such a leader in that field. And then here's another person that you may have heard of, and it's amazing to think about her having doubts, and that's Mother Teresa. Did you know following her death, her private diaries were discovered, and what they found was that there was a lot of soul searching and many dark nights of the soul, as I think the term that's often used. And Mother Teresa once wrote, where is my faith? Even deep down, there is nothing but emptiness and darkness. My God, how painful is this path. I have no faith. Incredible. And then one last person, and some of you have never been around the Bible or theology, and you may not have, or church history will know this person, but others of you will be amazed that this guy's included in the list. You know his name? John Calvin. Incredible, huh? He once wrote, for unbelief is so deeply rooted in our hearts, and we are so inclined to it, that not without hard struggle is one able to persuade himself that all we confess is true. Do you have doubts sometimes about God? About God's love for you? About the truthfulness of the Bible? Do you have doubts about why good people suffer? Does that bother you at all? Do you have doubts about why God doesn't do more than he does to stop suffering? How about just the whole thing of God creating the world? Does that seem pretty far-fetched to you? Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people struggle with those kinds of thoughts. One of the things I've found through the years of study is that doubt, like anything else, can be analyzed, categorized, kind of dissected. It's like anything else. The more you can break it down, the easier it is to understand. And therefore, it's not such a scary monster. I think too often we look at doubt like it was some big monster in the cellar, that we don't want to let out. Oh, if we let him out, he'll destroy my faith. I got to run from him quickly. But if you just kind of understand who doubt is in the light of day, it's not as bad. So types of doubt. I think there's 6 of them. Let me share with them quickly. And we're going to be looking at one of these each week. Obviously, today we're talking about honest doubt. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Another form of doubt is experiential doubt. That's when something really bad happens to you, and as a result, you doubt that there could be a God because of that thing that happened to you. I've talked to a lot of cancer patients who struggle sometimes to believe in God. Oh, they may be pretending to, because everybody, when they tell you got the C word, it's amazing how religious people can get. But down deep, there can be great doubts because of the suffering and pain the person can be in. How about religious doubts? What are those? I think those are doubts that come about as a result of people looking at the wide spectrum of religion, including Christianity, and seeing how many failures there are and how many different views there are. And some of the people who practice these different religions, including Christianity, are so weird. And it kind of makes you just want to back away, and run the other way. And so that's something that's very real. I struggle with this when I struggle with 2 big things, and I'll talk about these in a week ahead. I struggle about, how could Christianity be the only true faith? And the other thing was, how can Christianity be true when there's so many fakes and, charlatans and hypocrites? Of course, I would never identify myself as one of those. That was, we always say, it's those people over there that make us look bad. And so I asked that of a professor one time, and I got what I thought was a great answer. He said, anytime there's light, there's always going to be bugs. Some of you will think about that later this afternoon, and you'll get it. Right now, you're still wondering where. Anyway, and so he used to tell us, he would say, students, don't be bugs. Now go and love God. It was a very interesting thing he said. Anyway, religious doubt can come about. How about intellectual doubt? That's the kind we're most probably familiar with, the kind that comes up as a result of what we think is the proof of science. But what we need to realize is that this is doubt that results from the mistaken belief that knowledge and faith are mutually exclusive. I happen to believe that all truth, all knowledge is from God, and therefore is to be embraced and we're not to be scared of it. And it doesn't destroy my faith, it strengthens my faith. But we'll talk about that here in about 3 weeks. You don't want to miss that particular week. How about dishonest doubt? Dishonest doubt is when someone is determined not to believe regardless of what they find. Doesn't matter the answer, I know what I believe, and that is that I doubt and that I don't believe. It's very dishonest in that sense. You're not really doubting, you're doing something else. You've moved into the realm of skepticism and unbelief. And even the Bible has some things to talk about that. And then finally, we want to talk about naive doubt. And what that is, that's just when someone's too lazy to get the answer. And a lot of people say, yeah, that's me. I'm right there. You guys are amazingly quiet. Normally this service is really, we're laughing, we're having a good time. And you guys are going, I don't have any doubts, but I hope you're getting something out of this. That's what you're doing. Now, I tell you, one thing about this list of the types of doubt is that it's not a mutually exclusive list, meaning that it's not carefully divided all the time in each person or sometimes even within a person. And so you could have one type of doubt, a part of this doubt, part of that doubt. You may go through different phases in your life where you're having more one type of doubt than another. The good news is, listen to this, is that I believe there are excellent answers and clear evidence that will help us in each of these areas. And that's why I want to encourage you to come each week, because we'll be tackling one of these every week. And by the way, another thing I want to encourage you to do in this series is to do your own study. Because one of the most helpful things that I ever came across, and again, it was really I was like my third year at university, when I finally sat down with a professor and I kept asking all these questions in class, asking all these questions. Finally, this professor pulled me out of class and said, what you really need to do is to go study this for yourself. Because whatever I get to tell you, you're going to doubt anyway. And that was really good advice. So what I would encourage you to do is do your own research. And one of the best ways you can do it is to get online. You have to be careful. It's a jungle out there. But this is a very good guy, very trustworthy guy named Gary Habermas. And he teaches at Liberty University, excellent school in the U.S. And surprisingly enough, he has put all of his materials online for free. What is the deal there? The guy doesn't like money? I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I think it's so impressive. And I'm not talking about, a little pamphlet that you read and then, you get a solicitation for donations. No. This is like his whole book. I mean, this is like a 10-chapter, 150-page book with 100 footnotes. Excellent resource. And there's this is the Dealing with Doubt and the Thomas Factor, which is growing in your faith in God through your doubts. So 2 very good resources that you can go. And like I said, they're free. Check it out. All right? So, what about honest doubt? What does the Bible have to say about honest doubt? There's a story that I think encapsulates how God feels about honest doubt better than anything you'll read anywhere, anytime. And it's found in the 9th chapter of the book of Mark. So if you have a Bible or an electronic device you want to open up, that's fine. I'll be putting the verses up on the screen. But I would love for you to hear about this story that happened to Jesus. It's really amazing. It starts in Mark 9 this way. Verse 14. And when they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them. Now, let's stop there just a minute and ask, who is this? Well, we're talking about Jesus and 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, who after what we believe based on the chronology of the Gospels, probably was up the very far northern part of what is today Lebanon and Syria, on the border of Lebanon and Syria, to the far northern part of Galilee. And they had walked all the way up north. It would have taken them several days. And Jesus took his 12 disciples up there, spent some time with them. There was a place that he stopped and he asked them kind of the final question. This was only about 6 months before he died. And he asked them this question, who do people say that I am? And you can imagine there was this pregnant pause among all the disciples. And then finally, Peter, who was never bashful about hearing his own voice, said, you are the Christ, meaning the Messiah or the promised one. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Ding, ding, ding. Right answer. He passed. And from that moment, you can trace the ministry of Christ and you can see how it changes there. It's like a watershed event. And the realization that Jesus had that these guys got it really changed what he did with them from then on. Well, anyway, one of the things he did was he took the 3 team leaders, Peter, James, and John, and he left the others, and he went up on top of a high mountain, which we think is probably the snow-capped Mount Hermon. If you've ever been in that part of the world, you've seen it. You can't miss it. It's, 2,500 meters high, nearly 10,000 feet. Just dominates everything. And you can imagine Jesus walking up there and maybe taking 2-3 days to get up to the level. We don't know. But when he got up there, what happened? And again, if you've never read this, you ought to check it out. It's truly phenomenal. Jesus experienced what's called the transfiguration, where he peeled back his humanity for just a brief while and let Peter, James, and John see who he really was, which was the God incarnate, the Alpha and the Omega, the glorious one, the one for whom there was no one can contain. I mean, this was God in flesh. And he showed them that. And it was absolutely dramatic. As a matter of fact, such a sensational thing it was that the great painter Raphael, you probably heard of him, decided that his crowning achievement in life would be to paint the Transfiguration. And so this is the last painting he ever painted. He painted it in 1502. He died while painting this. Matter of fact, some of his students had to finish it. But you can see his vision of the Transfiguration. There's Peter, James, and John. There's Elijah and Moses with him. And while this was going on up on the mountain, guess what was happening? Down at the base of the mountain, his disciples had gotten into a terrible situation. A father who had a son who was possessed by a spirit, an evil spirit, had brought the boy, because he was suffering greatly, to Jesus' disciples for them to cast the demon out. And the disciples tried everything they could, and they couldn't do it. I mean, you can imagine the thing, listen, what was it Jesus said? What was that part? Oh, yeah, let's say that to him. Okay, we're going to say that. What was that Sermon on the Mount? To give him the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe that, They did everything except pray. These guys, it's like us. At any rate, so they can't cast the demon out. So here's Raphael saying, the glory of Christ and the suffering of humanity in such close proximity. It's like it captures the whole essence of the ministry of Christ. And over here on the right, you can kind of see, this is, here we go, only on the screen. See this guy right here? This is the boy who's suffering. This is the father. And you don't have really good resolution, but if you look at this later on the internet, it's amazing the look Raphael captured in this boy's face. He's tormented. He's in agony. He looks completely out of it. It's really startling and a dramatic portrayal of the story we're going to talk about. So Jesus and the three come on back down. Probably takes, it says the next day, so it took them a while to come down. And here's what happens. And they came down and they came upon a large crowd, great multitude, one of the other gospel writers says. By the way, this is found in Matthew 17 and also in Luke 9. So you ought to jot that down. You ought to read all three accounts if you want to get the whole story. And some scribes, those were the religious lawyers, essentially. And many of them were, wealthy Pharisees themselves. Scribes arguing with the 9 disciples. They had pounced on these guys because of their failure to take care of this. And immediately when the entire crowd saw Jesus, they were amazed and began running to greet him. Why were they doing that? Because Jesus was kind of a pop hero right now. I mean, anybody who gives out free lunches, he's going to be, people are going to like him when he comes. Not only that, but I think some of these people had obviously been around Jesus before because he had been traveling around all over Galilee doing miracles. And I think they got, okay, the remedial students couldn't do it. Now we got the teacher. This is going to be good. We're going to have Jesus versus the scribes. Man, this is going to be, UFC cage fight right here. This is going to be great. And so Jesus came up and he asked them, what are you discussing with them? Greek word literally means what are you debating or what are you arguing about? The idea of the word is back and forth. So here's the scribes and here's the disciples going, no. It's that kind of thing. And so he said, what are you discussing? And one in the crowd, this father, ran up to Jesus and said, teacher, respectful comment, I brought you my son, you weren't here, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute. Now, it's interesting that in Matthew 17, you need to remember Matthew was one of the 9, so he was also there. Matthew says that the father at first says the son is a lunatic and is very ill. It's almost as though he's kind of trying to be a little bit in denial. I mean, who wants to walk around saying, hey, this is my, hi, I'm Joe, and this is my son, John, and he's full of a demon, so don't mind him. This is my son, he's sick. This is my son, he's a little, that kind of thing. Interesting. I mean, you just see the life of people in this, can't you? This is a father who is suffering greatly. Imagine having a boy in this kind of condition. So he said he has a spirit which makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. It sounds a little like epilepsy, but it's not epilepsy. And the Bible never calls epilepsy demonic. It says you're sick or you got a demon. Those are two separate things. And Jesus never confused them. And I know some of you are probably thinking right now, because we're talking about doubts. You're probably thinking, oh, demons, huh? Okay, I'm backing away slowly, I don't believe that, I'm out of here. But I want you to know that, and again, we can't unload the whole trunk today, but I want you to know that one of the things that most convinced me of the evidence of a world that we do not see was after I became a pastor, got out of theology school, and began to confront people and their problems in a way that only a pastor does. And I did not see much of it. I think in some countries there's a great deal of it, and in some countries where I was, in the U.S., there wasn't a lot of it, at least where I was. But guarantee you, there were things I encountered that cannot be explained psychologically, medically, humanly. I mean, I had them tested, I know. And there were things, it's not like the movies, if you've seen those, with the pea soup and your head turning around and the TV talking. No, we're not talking about. But I'm talking about real, genuine, scary, frightening, things that trouble you, that are inexplicable that happen. And you realize that you're confronting something that is not a part of the rational, empirical world. And to me, because there was evidence of that, it gave me evidence that there must be the other side as well. And so this boy had demon, and had it for a long time, and it was tormenting him. As a matter of fact, one gospel writer says that it was hardly leaving him alone. And another troubling thing that Luke tells us is that the man admits that this was his only son. I want to encourage you to go through the Gospels and read the miracles of Jesus and see how many times Jesus chose to heal or raise someone from the dead who was an only child. It shows great compassion on the part of Jesus. You also need to remember that a son at this time was critically important to your survival, important to your, if something happened to him, who was going to take care of the wife and the, other family members, had to be a son. So having a son who wasn't going to live long, which is what was going to happen to this child if this continued, is really, really something. And the word that's used to describe son here gives you the idea that this was a young boy, not a toddler, but also not a teenager. Probably a kid that was, maybe 8, 10 years of age. How many of you have children in that age? How would you imagine seeing them? This had been going on. Jesus is going to ask the father. The father's going to say it's been going on since he was a baby. So here's this boy, probably covered with scars, burns, that gaunt look. Maybe lots of times he didn't eat. They kept him inside. Maybe he was pasty white. The tragedy of this family is incredible. And immediately Jesus picks up on that. It's interesting. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not. And you can imagine Jesus looking at the Father and going at the disciples. Bad day to be a disciple. And he answered them and said, "Oh, unbelieving generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me." I don't think he was scolding them as much as he was expressing his grief that this boy had to continue to suffer when the remedy was available. He had already told the disciples they could cast out demons, and Mark 3 had given them the power. Mark 6, they'd done it. But apparently this day, they were just acting like us. They were just idiots that day. So they brought the boy to him. And interesting, this happens all the time. Whenever Jesus is around and someone who is possessed in some occult way, whenever that person begins to get near Jesus, the manifestation of this thing happens. And that's exactly what happens here. There was clearly something between Satan and Jesus. And when he saw him, meaning Jesus, immediately the Spirit threw him into a convulsion, falling to the ground. He began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the Father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood." And it often throws him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. How would you like having a child like that? And the tragedy was that the Spirit, when these things would happen, would make the boy mute so that he couldn't cry out. So you'd come in from, the farm, farming or the vineyard or something, and there would be your boy with his hand in the fire, burning, unable to move to get it out because he was paralyzed, unable to cry out for help. Can you imagine that? Your heart bleeds when you think about this. I can imagine these parents sitting up night after night watching this boy 24 hours a day for fear of what was going to happen to him. It's unconscionable. And that's exactly what Satan wants to do. He wants to destroy. He's a killer. He's a maimer. God wants to bring life and joy and happiness and unity. He wants to bless you. Satan wants to destroy you. He won't make it look like that at first, but eventually that's exactly what he'll do. So what does the man do? He says, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." He uses the word if. You see that? If you can do anything. And you can only imagine that this father had probably been many places to try and get help before, not able to get them. And so Jesus picks up on the little participle conditional clause. If you can, all things are possible to him who believes. I don't think he meant you got to have more faith. I think what he meant was, if you believe in me, all things are possible. And immediately the boy's father cried out and said, read that with me, "I do believe, help my unbelief." Wow, what an amazing statement. That word help there is a present imperative, which means that it literally says, "I do believe, please continually help my unbelief." I don't just need it now, I need it every day. That's a wonderful prayer to pray. And Jesus, when he saw a crowd was rapidly gathering because he wasn't trying to put on a sideshow, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying, "You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again." Interesting. No shenanigans, no, incantations, no here, eat this root on a full night of a full moon and it'll all be gone. And crying out and throwing him into terrible convulsions, it came out. And the boy became so much like a corpse that many of them said he's dead. But Jesus, not afraid, took him by the hand. Because it would make you unclean to touch a corpse if that's the boy was truly dead. Jesus knew he wasn't dead. And he reached down and he took his hand and he raised him up and he got up. You can imagine the father at that moment? Huh? Can you picture that? Can you picture him taking this boy home? Most women didn't leave the house at that time. That would have been a crowd primarily of men. You can imagine him taking that boy home and walking into the house. And here's this boy who her whole life has been like this. And now here he is like a normal boy. And now he's going to grow up to be a normal man and have children. And that's just a beautiful picture. And when he came into the house, his disciples began questioning him, saying, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he said, "This kind do not come out by anything but prayer." What a beautiful, beautiful story. 3 things, and then we'll be done. Number 1, notice how Jesus never judged or rejected anyone for expressing sincere doubt. He understands. He understands your doubts. He really does. You're not a bad person because you doubt. You simply have a mind that is questioning. And God understands that. He made your mind. He knows how it works. And he knows everything about you. And it wasn't like when Jesus said, I'm sorry that your son is like this. And the father looked up and said, "Listen, if you can do anything, please help us." And Jesus went, "Oh, you said the bad word, if. Sorry, I'm going to go over here and see if I can find somebody, who really has faith. You go right ahead and be in misery." It wasn't like that. So some of you are here today and you have never believed in God. And you're thinking right now, "I will never believe in God. I hate God for what he did to me or my parents or my child. I hate God." God understands. He really understands. It says over in Mark 12, about 3 chapters over, there's a man who came to Jesus and he wanted to know what was the greatest commandment. What was it Jesus said? He said, "You must love God with all your heart, with all your soul," and read that, "with all your mind." It's important that our minds love God too. God can help our minds do that because he made your mind and he can change your mind. He really can. The second thing is the best thing to do with our doubts is what? Admit them and ask God's help. He knows. He knows. I think sometimes we pretend that we need to hide our doubts from God, Don't tell anybody, but I don't really believe this. It's like, what? God doesn't know that? He doesn't hear that? God hears everything. The words of David to his son Solomon in 1 Chronicles 28 are so neat. He said, David was real old, about to die, and he told his son, "My son Solomon, I know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will let you find him." Did you hear that? It's really good advice. And the last thing is, our doubt doesn't stop God from working on our behalf. He's there. He's there. He understands. He knows. He's there. It's amazing what a little faith will do to allow God to reveal more of himself to you. Maybe you have just a tiniest little bit. That's okay. That father, man, he didn't believe much, but every bit of being within him, he was trying to believe. And he said, "God, help me to have more." And Jesus said, "That's enough. That's all you need." So God's there, wherever you are, whatever your situation, whatever your past, whatever problems, difficulties, doubts you've had. Psalm 139, one of my favorite psalms, says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" The answer is, I can't go anywhere because God is everywhere. He's here in Dubai. He's where you live. He's in your home country. He was in your family growing up. God is everywhere. He's brought you here to Dubai for a reason and a purpose. And that may well be for you to finally, ultimately, get your doubts answered. That's what we hope is going to take place over the next few weeks. There's a prayer I put in your program. It's a prayer that you might want to take with you and pray. So we're out of time today, but I would encourage you to take it and this week think about praying it. And I put it there because I think so often when I was going through difficult times, I felt like I couldn't even pray. I didn't know what to pray, didn't know how to pray. And it really helped me one time I came across the book of prayers, and that really got me through a difficult time. So I hope maybe this prayer will be something that would help you as well. Heavenly Father, thank you for being there. Thank you for understanding us. Thank you for knowing who we are and where we are. Thank you for, Lord, being ready to give us all the time we need to come to you. And Father, I pray right now for those who are here who are struggling, who do not have faith. They don't even have the faith of the Father. Lord, I pray that you would draw them here over the next few weeks as we talk about what you have to say about doubt. Lord, take away our doubts. Help us to find truth. Help us to be set free by that truth. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.